Hey there, and welcome, kids, to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox for the big week. It's the big week, so it's eclipse season a-coming. At the very end of the week, we have our first eclipse. So fasten your seatbelts about that. We'll talk about that towards the end of the podcast. But of course, first we're going to do a question, but also I'm going to promote my next class.
Yay.
I do this podcast to reach people, right? And then it's like it's not like I don't want to do announcements about my things that are coming up. It's like I literally don't think about it. I'm sure a much more ambitious person, would be like riddling the airwaves here with announcements. And I just always forget. But I'm really excited about one of my flagship classes that is being launched right now, and it hits the final Saturday of March. It's the
Great.
first class. It's Finding Your Voice. I love teaching this class, and it kind of came out of the blue by accident. That is, something happened in a class with a student, and I noticed that she needed some work on her voice. And out of that conflict was born a class where we do a look at people's relationship with their voices in their adult life based on how they were raised and formed in the family of origin. I teach about literal resonance of the voice. We cover the actor's warm-up a little bit in the first class. So it's literally a class to explore how well you are using your voice, setting boundaries, being powerful out there with your communication. And if you want to do a little self-investigation to look at ways in which you are hindering your powerful expression of the world, check out that class at michaellennox.com.
And I'd say it's one of your more popular classes, right? I feel like it's very popular.
Absolutely. And I think people want to have a stronger voice out there in the world. And it's funny, too, when I first came up with the idea of the class, my first thought was like, who am I to teach this class?
Mm.
I don't have any problem using my voice out there in the world. And then it's like, wait a minute, Michael, you fought for decades to find your authentic voice because of the way it was robbed from you in your childhood. I might have been loud, but I wasn't authentic, and I had to learn how to find my voice, and so I am really the perfect person to teach this class. So check that out if that interests you. Meanwhile, let's ask our astrology question. This from Jess. Jess says, "Hi, Michael. I just wanted to drop you a line to say thank you for discussing intercepted houses on the pod this week. I'd never heard of them, and everything you said resonated." And then she goes on to say, I have some. I have an intercepted chart. So, yeah, you're welcome. A few weeks ago, you spoke about grand trines being useful for manifestation. Can you expand on that? How does that work? What advice do you have? I have a water grand trine, and I'd love to have a constructive way to use the energy because right now I mostly just cry a lot.
No.
And she threw in some emojis. I just love you and Zoe. Yay. You're my car ride buddies that I look forward to hearing from each week. And so happy that I found you. With much gratitude, Jess. She, her. So, yes, so it is true that grand trines in a natal chart speak to manifestation capacity. But I think the answer may be disappointing to Jess because a water trine really is about the feels. So let's just talk about why this is a thing in astrology. There are patterns in charts, and some of these patterns have like meaning, right? They're grand squares, grand trines, yods,
So
mystic
many.
rectangles, all kinds of lovely shapes. And patterns in a chart count. One of the reasons is that when geometrical patterns are showing up in a chart, if a planet or the moon triggers one corner of a pattern, it is gonna be simultaneously triggering each corner of the pattern, right? So if you have 3 planets that form this large triangle in the chart, that if one planet of that triangle is hit, all 3 are hit at the same time, or at least close enough to the same time, depending on the trueness of the shape. So when 2 planets interact in the harmonizing geometry of 120 degrees, the essence of that is flow from both. Each one is free to bring their full sort of capacity, and it will automatically meld well or blend well with the other planet. That's the nature of this angle in geometry. It's just the most flowing angle that 2 bodies can relate to. So then if you take a third body and put it into a place where now there's 3 trines being expressed, we call that a grand trine. So it's the flow piece that causes me to
Hmm.
say that grand trines relate to manifestation, because what is manifestation? It just means making stuff. Like, I'm gonna make stuff. I got some water over there, and I got some mud over there, and I'm gonna put them together, I'm gonna make mud pies. It's actually I sort of gave you a cross elemental example there, water and earth. The reason why a grand trine is powerful is because you've got planets that are operating in complete flow. Everybody shows up with their full voice, singing in harmony, so they can make stuff more easily. Like you and I, we make a good
Mhm.
podcast because we're like operating in a trine, when we get together to record. It's not a conflict energy. We harmonize and we create the podcast, right? So, 3 planets forming a triangle in a chart allows the planets in question to work so powerfully with each other, we would say they are capable of generating, creating, or manifesting stuff. The challenge with the question that Jess is asking is that, yeah, a grand water trine manifests deep feeling.
Yeah.
So the issue with someone with a grand water trine in their chart is, what's your relationship to emotions and their flowing capacity? How much work might you have to do to be graceful at being someone with that kind of energetic flow? I have a grand water trine in my chart. And it took decades, well into my 40s, 50s, and even now, to come to a place where I can allow the enormous amounts of feeling that flow through my body, such that in my 30s, I was like, give me the Prozac. I'm stopping at every stoplight and crying. There must be something wrong with me. And now I live in a body that's like, the crying daily is just feels like my instrument keeping itself lubricated, because I'm an emotional mind. My grand trine includes Chiron and Neptune and my North Node in Cancer, which means my dharma and destiny was to get more comfortable with my deep emotionality.
Yeah, in Cancer, wow.
Right, yeah. So that's my North Node. It's like my North Node is not about the business I have created or the service I do. It's really just how much I can allow myself to be emotional, and can I treat other people with empathy, courtesy, respect, and love. Cancer in the 7th house. At any rate, my grand water trine is about manifesting an inner experience of comfort with an enormous amount of emotionality. Grand air trines will generate manifestations of profoundly powerful intellectual and mental experiences. Grand fire trines and grand earth trines are potentially more about manifestation, the way that Jess is
Hmm.
thinking about it. So, a grand fire trine is about generating with ease and grace the combustion of change. Fire is change energy that can start things up and be creative because it's fiery. And grand earth trines are the ones that are about manifestation into form, because earth is form, right? So Yes, all grand trines can create manifestation vortexes, but the element that the planets are in counts. In a trine, the thing that makes a trine is that all of the elements are the same. A triangle shares the same element. That's why they will either be a water, an air, a fire, or an earth grand trine. But really, it's the earth trines that are about making stuff in form. And yes, Jess, you just got to use your grace and flow and a willingness to let feelings flow through you and not grab every feeling and think, oh my God, I got to wrestle with this or reject it or figure out what it means. No, you just gotta let them flow. So today is the day to start paying attention to everything that happens from the neck up. From today, March 18th, through April 1st, Mercury is in what we call his retrograde shadow. He just moved into Aries, and that's the sign that this entire retrograde will be in. So Mercury's going to be in Aries for a little while. And so, one of the things we want to think about Mercury in Aries is the fiery impulsivity of this cardinal fire sign of Aries. And communication can be a setup for challenges specifically about impulsivity, anger, too much fire, moving faster with your mind than, is going to be effective. That's a generalized experience of Mercury in Aries when you're looking for the
Mm,
shadows of Mercury in Aries. And any communication kerfuffle that exists between today and April 1st is very, very likely to be included in your backward motion Mercury retrograde process, which happens from April 1st to April 25th. So the more prepared you are for that backward motion, the easier it will be to navigate the difficult 3 weeks. But also, like, Mercury retrogrades are valuable. Like, they give us an opportunity to go within and find ways that our both communication styles and skills, as well as how we're perceiving our lives, we get to change things about that are problematic. So that's why we look for the problems. If we're going to be able to go into an unconscious process in the month of April to soften impulsive edges or whatever comes up, knowing what the challenges are is going to make that work more clear and precise and directed because you pay attention to the bumps in the road that are going to happen in the next 3 weeks. If you remember from last week's podcast, I said that this Mercury retrograde has only one major triple transit, and that's a conjunction to Chiron. So, what I love about that is Aries knows no holding back, right? Aries invented impulsivity. Unconscious wounds put into our voices is problematic, right? That's what wounded consciousness does. Like, we speak from or make decisions from or respond from a wounded place. So I think if there's a good way that Aries, Mercury in Aries could show us all where some wounds are if we impulsively blast from, through, or over wound consciousness, we're going to have some challenges over the next, 2.5 weeks. So pay attention and understand that the clearer you are about where communication and perception challenges show up for the rest of the month, the easier, not only the easier will the retrograde be, but the more valuable it will be and the more healing it will be. Tuesday evening around 7 p.m. or so, the sun will move into Aries. That's the kickoff of the astrological new year. It's the vernal equinox, autumnal down under. Days and nights are of equal length, and it is the beginning of the astrological new year. This is the Alpha Omega in Western astrology. This is where the relationship between the Earth and the Sun generates the experience of days and nights of equal length. In Western astrology, no matter where the placement is in the solar system, we call that 0 degrees of Aries. I spoke about this at length in last week's podcast, and I'm hoping that idea is landing on some people to understand why Western astrology doesn't match the constellations, but just listen to last week's if you missed it and understand that we start up the evolution of the zodiac with 0 degrees of Aries, which we just declare Tuesday evening to be that moment. Now, I will also tell you all, I'm celebrating the equinox on Wednesday, on the 20th, because where I live in the western part of the United States, the sun is in Pisces all day long until about 7 or 8 at night. That happens to be my bedtime, so I will be in bed. And the first day that we wake up into the Aries mansion is Wednesday. So I want to be really clear about that. The technical starting moment of the equinox is Tuesday night, but the first day that is the equinox for celebrating, at least in my world, will be Wednesday. You know, seasonality is part of how civilization became what it became because it was seasons that allowed us to plan for farming, which allowed us to store food, which allowed us to feed everybody, which allowed some people to not have to hunt and gather, and they got to specialize and do other things, right? Which, by the way, included that some people looked up. Like if I was living in a community 6, 7, 8,000 years ago, and I lived somewhere where grain was starting to be held, I would be one of those people who would be eating the grain and not hunting with the rest of the guys because I'm a specialist. In fact, I think that queer people were the first specialists.
Hmm.
Period. I think that thousands and thousands of years ago when we could, store grain and not have everybody hunt and gather, the people who were like, well, I want to do something different. So that's just my personal orientation to that idea. But anyway, the point is, if the human race created civilization and the enormous conscious expression that we have in our modern world, it started with the seasons.
Hmm.
And the capacity to understand seasonality has to do with people who looked up and started measuring things like the length of the day and found that every time we returned to this moment when spring was springing and things were harvesting and growing that had been planted perhaps, or maybe this is you live in a geography where this was the time to plant, the direct connection between the solstices and the equinoxes to human race first coming into magnificence is why I think the pagan celebration of the equinoxes and the solstices, that's why they're important to me. Right? So at the equinox, I'm honoring my humanness, not my, political views or my country of origin consciousness. So Wednesday is the first official day of the Aries mansion. I will certainly celebrate by, at some point in my ritual experience, drawing a mandala. That's sort of the ritual du jour for me at the spring equinox, because if the solar system is expressing some kind of balance and harmony between the light and the dark, then I want to create some kind of expression of the same. That each one of us exists as a balance between our light half and our darker half. And this is why the yin yang symbol is so powerful an expression of this. And in the true yin yang symbol, you've got a white sort of cornucopia shape and a black one, and then there's a black dot in the middle of the white one and a white dot in the middle of the black one. Balance, harmony. So when we get to the solstices, we've gotta stretch out because we're in the longest day or the longest night. But in the equinoxes, it's all about harmony and balance, and because the spring one in the northern hemisphere matches with the sort of the beginning of new life, that's why I do a mandala in the spring vernal equinox, just to have a creative expression of my own experience of balance between consciousness, unconscious, masculine, feminine, light, shadow, you name it, it's in balance during this time. Ritualize that a little bit, and the unconscious doesn't know it's a ritual. It thinks that you're actually expressing a declaration of your harmony and balance at the same moment that the solar system is doing the same. I think that's a powerful way to remind us that we are part of this magnificent thing called existence itself. There's a couple of things to talk about with the personal planets, specifically Mars and Venus. On Saturday, Mars is going to leave Aquarius and move into Pisces. So we will be in the Aries mansion, of course, once we get there. Mercury not only is in Aries, he'll go retrograde there, so he's there for a while. So we've got a lot of fire in the atmosphere, and we're kind of coming out of the overwhelming watery sort of period that we were in. So what do I mean by that? It's like when we got a lot of water in the atmosphere, we're watery at the individual level, water slash emotions. Feels have been up. And it's possible that some of y'all have been a little less wet and watery from the Aries energy, or will as the week progresses and the sun moves into Aries. But Mars moving into Pisces is decidedly emotional. The feels go a little bit higher. Mars is not the planet that rules the emotional body. That's Venus. But Venus is in Pisces.
Oh man.
So Mars in Pisces will color our experience for a couple of weeks. Mars spends about 6 weeks in every sign. So he'll be there until April 30th. So for the rest of the month of March and all of April, it's the decision making that I want you to sort of be thinking
Hmm.
about. That Mars as the planet of choice, decision, and action is steeped in the watery spiritual sensibility of the Pisces mansion, and it changes how we move, how we choose, how we decide. Mars is not debilitated in this sign, so it's like not a sign of his fall or his detriment, but it is antithetical to Mars's way, fiery and action oriented, to be in the deepest of the three water mansions. Certainly, any and every piece of physical effort you put in to deepening your spiritual practices capacity to keep you in flow gets richer and juicier with Mars in Pisces. Dreams may rise up. Mars rules the physical body. Neptune rules dreaming. And if you put the physical body into a sleep state, dreams can flood through. So that is something to be in consideration. Um, Given the fact that Pisces is the mansion where we know forgiveness, love, and compassion more directly, it's an interesting dichotomy to have the planet that is the warrior in the sign that allows for compassion, forgiveness, and empathy, something that Aries, the ruling sign of Mars, has no knowledge of. So sort of interesting as Pisces as the last sign and Aries as the first. There's also something juicy about the planet of action who's ruled by Aries gets to dive through the deep waters of the unconscious for 6 weeks before bursting up into the I am that is the Aries mansion. And so I think there's something beautiful about that as we all have Mars moving into Pisces and experience 6 weeks of a more direct connection to flow and spirit and inspiration, I think, than when Aries bursts in to his I mean, when Mars bursts into his ruling side of Aries at the very beginning of May. There'll be a softer sense of Mars's action-oriented stuff because of the 6 weeks in Pisces. Certainly, all of us at the individual not Mars himself. Mars is just the planet of war, and he can't wait to get home into Aries next month. But us, we always wanna soften and temper our Mars and Aries sensibilities if impulsivity or anger is, driving problematic experiences. 6 weeks of Mars in Pisces is gonna get all of us more in touch with what it is to have empathy, forgiveness, and compassion automatically be part of how you choose and decide things and how you relate to your own anger.
Hmm.
It's actually a very big week for my Venus update. So if you've been following along, every week when there's something to be said about what Venus is doing, I do a segment that's just talking about her movement because she's been so profoundly activated the solar system for the last year and a half with a retrograde last year, and the eclipse season of last was, both lunations were ruled by her. And so I'm just going to keep talking about Venus until she returns to Leo, where she did her retrograde last summer, right? So big news for Venus. So this is speaking into your relationship dynamic, your processing of your emotional body, and it starts with something that's happening on Thursday, which is a conjunction between Venus and Saturn. So while there are some energetic things that will happen as we move from like Wednesday through Thursday and Friday that are just about delays, things that slow down because Saturn always puts the brakes on things. The language I usually use in my daily Astro Alert subscriptions is usually like, we're learning a lesson if about love and how we give and receive love if Saturn is hosting Venus for a drive by. And of course, because Venus has been so active in the last year plus, then this meeting with Saturn counts more than it would have if it had been a year or two ago or a year or two from now. I love that Venus is in Pisces because this opens us up to the deep unconscious wisdom that's, possibly being held by our emotional body. So we meet up with Saturn on Thursday, and there may be lessons to learn about giving and receiving love. There might be a slow down, breakdown thing that causes you to have to address something relationally, right? So that's the essence of Venus towards the end of this week is pay attention to what your heart is telling you, things that are coming up in your intimate relationships that are in the direction of either lessons that need to be learned or showing up differently because of lessons you already have learned about how you give and receive love. So you pay attention towards the end of the week for slowdowns, lessons, and squeezes designed to teach. And then understand that as we move through the weekend, we're in a beautifully expansive experience of love as Venus sextiles Jupiter, sort of opening us up to everything that's possible if we live in our hearts fully. But also, Venus will be generating a great eliminator in conjunct with the South Node at the same time on Sunday. So that means we learn a lesson or get confronted with something we have to work on towards the end of the week. And as we move through the weekend, our hearts are going to be wide open and lit up as we then allow for a choice to move in a new direction, to let something go, to release an old emotional pattern that might have been squeezing you, and you get another pass at dropping such patterns as we move through the weekend. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a tiny little bit about eclipse season today. Ironically, the eclipse actually happens on Monday the 25th. So technically, as part of our next week's podcast, right? Because that's how we go. We go from Monday through Sunday, and the podcast comes out midnight on Sunday nights. So technically, the eclipse is Monday the 25th, but it's Monday the 25th at 12:01 a.m. Which really means it's like practically Sunday here in the West Coast. But it also means that it's fully Monday for those of you, say, in the East Coast. It's 3 in the morning on Monday. And for those of you in Europe and Africa, and I do have listeners from those places, this is fully in your calendar day Monday. So next week's podcast will open with a deep and comprehensive segment on the eclipses, what they are, the eclipse season, the wormhole, and all of the essence of that full moon in more depth. So, what I'll say today is that we're kicked off into the eclipse wormhole with Monday of next week. Sun's in Aries, or will be, at that point, not as we listen to this podcast first, but the sun moves into Aries during the week ahead. When the sun is in Aries, we're in consideration of the me, I go first, what's right for myself. And then in Libra, it's where we're in consideration of other. And so we're releasing in a full moon in Libra anything that would inhibit our ability to have that full on charged up, I'm ready to go and move in the Aries sensibility. This is why we call Aries season the beginning of the astrological new year, because it's the first sign of the zodiac where we complete the endings with Pisces and begin again with Aries. And so if Aries holds for us this capacity to thrust forward powerfully, then a Libra full moon asks us to let go of anything that inhibits that ability in us, whether it's we're too impulsive and we want the Libra to help us release impulsivity so that we can soften our approach, or we are not active enough and the Libra consciousness of, oh, I'll just keep the peace is actually not serving you because you want to find a little bit more fire in how you go. But that's certainly the essence of any full moon in Libra. But because, of course, it's an eclipse, it's wildly transformative. And I think the fact that the first eclipse of a 2 eclipse season is a full moon means that we are in epic levels of unconscious release, because the second eclipse is a new moon in Aries, which is really the startup of the astrological new year, because, Aries mansion sets us up to be in the new year, but it's the new moon that kicks off the cycle of forward motion. So next week's podcast will go more deeply into what an eclipse is, what the wormhole is, how you can sort of work with this energy for the next 2 weeks between eclipses. But I wanted to make sure that we talked about it at least a little bit, because although this podcast, ends its coverage before the eclipse, it's like the first thing that we bump into on Monday of next week. So meanwhile, get through the week. Happy equinox. Start paying attention to the Mercury stuff that comes up so you can have an easier experience of his backward motion in April. And as I love to say, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have a call-in dreamer. Hey Sam, what you dreaming?
Hi, thanks for having me. Okay, so this is a dream I had a couple weeks ago. I know there were events that preceded this particular moment in the dream, but my recall begins at the top of an unrealistically big slide, at least like 10 stories high. It wasn't at a park or anything, but inside of a building of some sort where there was an entrance to the slide. It was one of those like tube slides that like spirals, and you're contained inside the whole thing, like it's like a chute, and it was really wide as well. So as soon as I sat down to go down the slide, I realized that I forgot to grab a blanket, which was apparently needed to slide down it. So I got a blanket from this otherwise unimportant slide attendant. But as soon as I realized I forgot the blanket, it really changed the mood of the dream and my emotions in the dream. And I was all of a sudden really anxious and nervous and uncomfortable with what was happening. I had a sense that the slide was the only way to exit the area, so I didn't have a choice but to go down it, despite feeling like something just wasn't right.
Yeah.
So I hesitantly started sliding down almost in slow motion. But before making it too far, I noticed like a traffic jam around the next bend of the spiral. I don't recall exactly what it was made up of, but there was at least one other person, and the rest just seemed to be like a pile of random stuff, or maybe it was just some sort of like blob blocking the way down. As soon as I noticed this, I started freaking out because I knew I was stuck. The slide was huge, and I was stuck in the middle, surrounded on all sides, and far away from the entrance and the exit. I couldn't go down because of the blockage, and I thought about trying to climb back up, but I didn't
Yeah,
think I could
yeah,
make it because it
yeah.
was slippery. I tried to talk to the other person about what was happening. I don't know if they responded. And I just had this like overwhelming feeling of panic and fear, like I was going to die there. And so was this other person and anyone else who might be there. And I was so terrified that I woke myself up to get out of the situation. But the
You
feeling was hard to shake off. So that's the end of the dream. But I had one other sort of adjacent thought that I wanted to ask. I don't often have things that I would
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah.
identify as like nightmares because, like with the above dream, I usually wake myself up before things get too intense or scary. And I guess I was just wondering if this was common because I don't do it on purpose. And honestly, sometimes, like with this dream, I sort of wish I could stay and see what would happen. But it's like my body or or subconscious like knows that it's too much and just like wakes me up. And so I guess I was just wondering like if this is normal or if it's sort of kind of like lucid dreaming or it's like
Yeah.
just a weird thing that my body does. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you a question. Though you wake up from a nightmare in this way that you're describing as kind of
Hmm.
self-generated, do you remember the dream that you were in?
Yeah, like I mean, with this one, I did. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, so here's how my first response to the question, Sam, is that the body knows what
Hmm.
it's doing, right? And the brain is in the body. So, right? So the idea that your psyche somehow allows you, and yeah, I would call this sort of in the camp of
Hmm.
lucidity, that you have an inner structure that says, message received, I'm at my limit. I'm saying pineapple. That's my safe word. And I wake up. So it's like if that's something that happens for you, I would call that part of your dream style.
Hmm.
And so therefore it's got to be like sacred. Like I dream of being in community. Like all my dreams are like I'm in a community. I'm in a community. I'm in not the same community. I'm just always in community, but I'm also a person who orients towards community as a concept in my life. So that doesn't make my dreams about community like weird. It just makes them my style.
Interesting.
Right. And I think about that a lot and I make correlations to like my waking life experience of how I relate to community. So similar to you, I would say that this is so specific to you and it's consistent
Hmm.
And if it's consistent, then we wanna just honor it as right and true. It's a right and true way that your psyche, your soul, your higher self is managing the experience of both collecting the shadow data in the dreamscape and then remembering just enough so that your waking life consciousness can process it.
Cool.
I will add this. Nope, I haven't really heard this
Huh.
before in hearing thousands of people talking about their dream experience, but it fits in structural ideas that I have heard before,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So there are ways that a person sort of stylistically dreams and sleeps, and this is yours, and I wouldn't think of it as a detriment, but
Hmm.
just a style.
Okay.
And you certainly remembered enough about this dream. So was there any water involved? Because you didn't mention water at all, and the slide is inside of a building, so I just wanna rule that out. No water
No,
sensibility?
not at this part that I recall. No.
Okay, got it. So then I have to dissect what I would feel about this dream knowing that there's no water involved, that you're not sliding down into
Hmm.
water. So we remove that, and I can support an idea that we're not in emotional consciousness because the slide is in a
Hmm.
building. Buildings are not about the unconscious or intuition or fluid sort of human psyche. Buildings are structures that we
Hmm.
make. So in dream world, a building is like a man-made structure. It's about the community or how politics works or like what town you live in or like where you do your dry cleaning or
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Right? Building is not like if this dream were in like nature, it'd be like, oh, you're in consideration of something organic about your like human embodiment. But you're not. You're thinking about life as a structural thing that 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 the collective has agreed that all of these
Mm-hmm.
constructs exist. Like gender and you know, I could list the
Right.
list,
Right.
but you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying, right? You and me. So then we've got to be in a consideration of what it's like to surrender, what it's like to take risk, what it's like to do something that you have no idea what the outcome will be. And the scariness of that is what the dream is sort of saying, look, here's how scared you are to jump
Hmm.
in to that windy, crazy turmoil of the spiraling slide. So there's something about that I start with, but you do go in.
Yeah.
That right, that counts, Sam. It's like, you're not at the place where I would declare you would be if the dream were like, and I don't get in the slide,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because you actually do.
Right.
So that's the snapshot is not Sam sits life out. Sam has learned to take risks. Sam has learned to dive in. Um, a little
Yeah.
hesitant, a little slow moey. That's you know. Um, what do you think like? What do you like? What's your personal association with the traffic jam? On one hand, it's just your anxieties,
Yeah.
right? Because it's what triggers you to rethink this experience. You get anxious when you notice that there's a
Yeah.
blockage.
I mean, at that I got anxious originally when I was like, I don't know, something about like needing this blanket and forgetting it made me anxious.
Oh, the
Yeah.
blanket,
But
the
then the traffic
blanket.
jam. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You
Oh,
can talk about the blanket first.
okay, I'm so sorry. It's there in my notes, but I forgot it. Oh, the blanket. The blanket's about comfort.
Okay. Yeah.
The blanket makes it
Hmm.
smoother. So you know that you can't protect yourself from some surrender you have to dive into. The blanket would make the edges of the tube softer. It would make the flow
Hmm.
faster. It would make the spinning and spiraling more spinny and spirally. And you don't have that, and that makes you anxious. That's like, okay, I got to take a risk, and I'm not going to have my blankie. I'm not going to have my comfort. I'm not going to have my warmth, and I'm not going to have the thing that's going to make the ride smoother.
Hmm.
This ride may chap my ass.
Hmm.
So then the traffic jam, I think, is just about, I don't know, like moments of confusion, moments where things don't go the way you think they're going to go and you have to stop flow to unknot the conflicts. right? If I wanna get from point A to point B, and in between there's a traffic jam, that would be the conflict I have to face in order to successfully navigate the manifested
Yeah.
desire. So that's another way that the traffic jam sort of vibes for
Yeah,
me.
it's interesting what you said about sort of the like the slide and the structures and stuff earlier. Because right now I'm in my very last semester of grad school and like applying for academic job, but
Oh, honey, you buried the fucking
yeah,
lead. So, can we just look at the dream through the lens of that added
yeah,
information?
definitely.
You're at the final end, and it's like, I want it to be smooth, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not gonna be.
Yeah,
There will be lots of thoughts and lots of anxieties and lots of bumps and lots of, and you don't have a choice,
right.
right?
Yeah, no, yeah,
So
and
I
I don't know.
I
It's
love
just
that. I love
interesting.
that added
Yeah, it's
information.
interesting because I don't feel like in my waking life like like sure there's little anxiety and stress, but I'm used to that. So it doesn't feel huge. So
Ah.
for that to show up in the dream is
So
interesting.
this is how we come full circle,
Yeah.
Sam, because you also posited a question about ultimately the value of
Mm-hmm.
nightmares. And here's the value of nightmares, which your psyche has a cute little switch mechanism in there that allows you to get the message you need, but not so much that you're
Yeah.
suffering when you wake up. But the value of the nightmare is that while your waking life consciousness can say to me, I don't feel that stressed. You're a whole human being, honey, which means you got an unconscious in which you are really stressed
Yeah, I guess
about it.
so.
And the dream visit to the stressful imagery allows you to wake up the next day and do the thing because the unconscious fears have been able to breathe for a moment.
I love that. Dreaming is so
And
cool.
I would look back at your calendar, honey. I would look back at at what was going on, like when you had that dream, just to see if there was any actual bump that might have triggered an anxious processing dream to come
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. That's good.
Oh, I love this. Thank you so much, Sam, and good
Yeah.
luck finishing up grad school.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Love that.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.